feminism is no longer about women's equality, nor is it about female solidarity, empowering each other against all odds. This vicious, no questions asked, take no prisoners animosity of feminists towards conservative women points squarely to the fact that rather than a battle of oppressed versus oppressor, it has become a war of left versus right. Feminists have become nothing more than cultural Marxists looking to push their pack mentality agenda by whatever means necessary, even if it means engaging in the behaviour they claim to hate in order to shut their opposition the hell up. Now, while right-wing women don't tend to care too much about this, it does make battling feminists incredibly daunting. It's not a secret that the only thing feminists hate more than men is the young conservative woman. Our very existence undermines the core narrative of their ideology, and that is that all women are oppressed by men. And as third-wave feminists tend to possess a kind of intellectual laziness, debating women on the right with facts will never be their preferred method of retaliation. This indicates either extraordinary ignorance or a lack of confidence in their own ideology. And my God, does that ever show when you take them on about something as baseless as the gender pay gap. Now, to mask this intellectual weakness, feminists have no problem attempting to humiliate their female opposition into submission, using the same commentary they would denounce as the worst kind of misogyny if uttered by a man to one of their own. The three best, most recent examples of this are Kellyanne Conway, who, as the first woman ever to lead a successful US election campaign, should be a feminist icon, but for the fact she has the wrong politics, Melania Trump, who isn't even a political figure, but is married to the wrong man and looks fabulous in a swimsuit. and me. But we will get to that later. So, to left-wing feminists, conservative women aren't actual women. They are deficient in some way, having either capitulated to the patriarchal dominion of men to serve their own interests, or are too dumb to think for themselves. That, or they're just attention-seeking. I have been accused of all three. The narrative that prominent Australian feminist journalists tried to spin when I emerged onto the public scene was that I was a ditzy opportunist who had whored her way into the good graces of powerful conservative men in order to benefit financially. Especially since I actually used to write for an online women's lifestyle magazine. It was all too easy for the Aussie feminazi hordes to insist I had done an ideological flip purely to make more money and to gain notoriety. Little do they know that actually, the most money I ever made as a journalist was writing for that women's magazine, primarily about celebrity gossip, lipstick, and sex, not politics. However, it would have been incomprehensible for them to accept that a right-wing woman had been left to her own devices to formulate her own opinions. And I'm fairly sure they still believe I am being coerced in some way or another. But what feminists don't seem to realize is that nowadays, being conservative, or at least publicly stating the fact you're not a feminist, epitomizes a woman thinking for herself, of boldly going against the grain and risking enormous backlash in the process. See, over the last few years, feminism has gone mainstream. Try as they might to deny it, being a feminist is no longer some niche symbol of resistance. It is an expected trope of female identity politics, and an increasingly boring one at that. Calling yourself a feminist is by far the safest option, both in the public and private realms. You won't be questioned on it, and if you're antagonized, the noisy left will leap to your defense. Feminism is the official doctrine of acceptable thought, and there is no longer anything original, interesting, or controversial about adopting its principles. As such, it is now conservative women who are rocking the boat in terms of what a woman should and shouldn't think, do, or say, which is the very, very worst possible thing that could have happened to feminism. Staging slut walks and screeching "fight the patriarchy" is now about as edgy and countercultural as pink fairy floss. If you're a woman and you really want to freak people out, Broadcast publicly that you think society could benefit from a return to traditional gender roles. Because women instinctively prioritize the nurturing of children, which is not untrue. Or that fat-positive Instagram bloggers are appallingly irresponsible and should have their accounts suspended as a danger to public health. Or even, and this is horribly controversial even for me, in order for long-term happiness, women should focus primarily on securing a man before they're 30 rather than climbing the career ladder, because a woman's sexual market value deteriorates with her fertility. Now, this kind of provocative right-wing eschewing of identity politics is what makes heads explode, not whinging about mansplaining and sexist air conditioning. That's a thing. You should YouTube that. Now, deep down, feminist leaders know this. They'd have to. Women in the Western world have, by law, every opportunity available to men. We benefit from a cultural disdain for and a court system that punishes rape, sexual harassment, wage disparity, gender discrimination, and other atrocities. However, we have been unable to enjoy it because a bunch of self-absorbed middle-class malcontents are running around telling us how terrible we should think our lives are. It's very irritating. Feminists have quite literally run out of things to complain about, which, in the fight for women's equality, would seem a good thing, you would have thought. But rather than celebrating victory and reaping the rewards, feminists keep inventing new things to whine about. If they didn't, not only would they be facing a purposeless existence, they would go out of business. Modern feminism is, amongst other things, a money-making exercise. And chillingly, the only way to profit is to make other women feel really, really terrible about themselves. Feminists do this by telling outright lies, like insisting that even though it has been illegal for decades to pay women less than men for the same work, somehow women will be gypped of equal pay across the board for the rest of their lives because of some misrepresented, non-existent gender pay gap. Now, this generates a sense of hopelessness and causes women to flock to feminist chiefs as seemingly their only source of comfort. Now, the two most effective means of achieving this are by promoting the concept of victimhood while uniting women against a common enemy, the straight white man. This absolves women of any responsibility for anything wrong with their lives and strangles them with the mantle of mediocrity. They end up trapped in a sort of banal limbo with only one apparent option for salvation: feminism. Feminist leaders relentlessly peddle these lies and histrionics to vulnerable women, which demolishes their self-esteem and drives a dagger through the heart of male-female relations. They are so convincing in their dogma, they have their adherents believing that the very act of a man sitting with his legs slightly spread is a vast patriarchal conspiracy designed to deprive women of public space, otherwise known as manspreading. These tactics are not for female empowerment. Such hyperbole is propagated only so feminists can sell out lectures and books. It is an economic strategy Machiavellian in its efficiency. As such, regardless of their insistence that women should feel empowered, feminists actually don't like confident women because they won't buy into the victimhood bubble and therefore can't be controlled by this concept of victimhood. So instead, the only women who are useful to feminist leaders are conventionally unattractive, probably not too bright, boyfriendless in the case of heterosexual women, misandrist in the case of lesbians, all of which in some bumbling way do not fit the mold of typical femininity. Once feminist leaders have roped in these anxious, ugly ducklings, no, I don't mean literally ugly, I mean like insecure. They are assigned a place on what I like to call the victimology scale, which is usually based on skin colour. So the darker their complexion, the higher they rank, and the more victim points they score. Now, these victim points are doled out according to the rules of intersectionality, which is a form of feminism that involves finding multiple things other than gender to blame for how horrible your life is. All women get at least 1 point for being women, except for conservative women who can go and die. However, if you are a white woman, you get less points than if you're black. If you're Muslim, you get even more points than that, but if you're Christian, you score much lower, even if you're female and black. So if you're a female, black, trans, Muslim midget with epilepsy, you can pretty much rule the leftist universe if you want to. After their place on the victimology scale is determined, these insecure women are drilled with the idea that the only way for women to be free-thinking, happy human beings is to bust through the bounds of a weird, invisible, malevolent force called the patriarchy, taking out as many innocent male bystanders as they can in the process, of course. When you lay out third-wave feminism like this, it all sounds a bit ridiculous. To be drawn into that sinkhole is to be a very foolish human being. It's no wonder then that this cesspool of self-deprecation and rampant unhappiness doesn't appeal to confident, self-satisfied women who are happy to stand on their own 2 feet. And as such, confident women, therefore, tend to gravitate towards libertarianism and conservatism. This is because, aside from the fact that according to a 2014 study in the Journal of Public Economics, we tend to be hotter than left-wing women. This is true. You can actually Google that. It's very interesting. We find the responsibility that comes with liberty to be very appealing. Our modus operandi is centered on individualism, not collectivism. And unlike collectivism's promise of having the pack to fall back on when things get tough, the isolation of individualism involves a certain degree of risk, which allows libertarian and conservative-minded women to thrive. We won't allow ourselves to be controlled by the mob, which renders us not only useless to feminists, but a grave danger that must be eradicated. So, how do you, as a right-wing woman, deal with the sheer onslaught of vitriol that comes from the feminist left whenever you tentatively raise your hand to speak? The approach from conservatives over the last couple of decades has been to smile politely, comply with the speech codes of the left to placate them lest they throw a characteristic tantrum, and blindly trust that eventually they'll come around because common sense will triumph.